The idea of dominance and emphasis to create variety is a little different than concentration dispersion. Dominance and emphasis actually require each other, whereas concentration and dispersion do not. And dominance is the idea of quantity or proportion rather than size. So as we look over an entire design space, what there is more of in terms of elements becomes dominant. What there is less of is therefore emphatic. Dominance emphasis is a contrast that actually uses the idea of things that are alike versus things that are different, which is the Gestalt principle of similarity. And dominance is a quantity issue, not a scale issue. It's very important to understand that. Emphasis is what there is less of. Because it's different, it becomes the standout. Because there is less of it and it's not joining in with those dominant elements, they stand out and become points of accent or focal points within a design. So as we look at this domus cover from several years ago, we notice that there is dominance in terms of, again, vertical striping. And within the vertical striping, of course, there are other images and patterns and so forth. And I've already mentioned the striping is vertical. And so these are the dominant elements within the design. The word domus is emphatic. It stands out on its own, and its subtext there become two elements that stand out because they are different than everything else, and they're also different in terms of direction. Dominance and emphasis are here in terms of the green dominates and the orange and the blue create different kinds of emphases within this design. Here, obviously, the dominance is the vertical stripes, the emphasis are the leaves. When you have the single occurrence of an emphatic element, you have what is known as an anomaly. An anomaly is a single striking occurrence. Emphasis can occur throughout a design. It can occur in different forms in a design as it's contrasted with dominance, but an anomaly actually occurs only once. And here we have an interior with a bunch of baskets on the wall, lots of texture going on. We've got not complementary, but definitely analogous furniture and rug and floor. And so by virtue of color, everything tends to stand together, allowing this little anomaly of plant life in the middle of the table to stand out and be the hero. In this two-page spread magazine ad, on the left-hand page, the verso page, we have all the stadium seats seen from straight down, bird's eye view, and we have one of them open. So we have a pattern, we have order, we have regularity, we have dominance in terms of the closed seat are dominant, and the open seat is the anomaly. It's not just emphatic, it's anomaly. As we look on this illuminated manuscript from just a few years ago, we notice that there is red type, which become emphatic, but what is the anomaly in this is the initial cap that's going on in here, the one decorative element that basically anchors the page. All the other patterning, the text, the larger text in the two columns, the smaller text in the one column, and moving up here, those are all dominant elements. The red becomes emphatic. It recurs 3 times there. And this is the anomaly, the one thing that stands out and pulls the eye and creates an anchor point for the page. This, by the way, is the writings of Aristotle, and it's from about early 1400s, I believe. Here, the letter forms create a pattern. They're repeated across the design space, and they're black against the white negative space, and they're dominant. And the reduction of size creates a certain kind of emphasis because this stands out from this. And the red forms are also emphatic. They occur more than once. So if it occurs more than once, it's not an anomaly, it's just a type of emphasis. Another way to create emphasis is to elaborate or embellish. And elaboration is a gradual change, a pattern that changes across a design surface, something that changes in direction, something that changes in terms of rhythm, and so forth. And so in this pattern, we start with certain weights of lines, certain intervals, and then they pinch here in this transitional area, and then they start moving back out at a different rate. But the movement is constant, the movement is continuous, and the movement is elaborative. What is emphasized here, by the way, is the pinch point and this relationship of these linear elements to the edge because of their scale. Here we saw this pattern actually on the wall behind the table and chairs a few slides ago. But this is all pattern created by short linear strokes, and again somewhat recalling our first project in terms of how that project, one way that could have been solved. But obviously we have a pattern that is an irregular pattern that creates a visual texture, a sense of tactile quality, and the elaboration is the fact that it is darker and then moves to lighter and then disappears. Also notice that there's a sense of concentration. These are fairly densely packed. If we go back to this one, there's a sense of concentration here and a sense of dispersion here on the edges. Ways that we create emphasis are by virtue of shape. So if we have dominance and emphasis, we can emphasize by virtue of shape, making a shape different from everything else. So obviously in this roller design, this poster, this is the emphatic shape. This is actually the anomaly, but it is anomaly by shape and color. It relates to the white in here, but it's definitely all by itself and becomes the first thing we see when we look at this poster. We can also emphasize by a change in direction, and there's only two elements within the larger rectangle in this painting, but the fact that the square aligns with the edges of the painting, the edges of the picture plane, the frame of reference. This and this actually blend in our understanding because they are similar. They are upright, straight sides, parallel sides, so forth. They're horizontal, vertical. So this red square, yes, it emphasizes by color, but what also helps is that it's tilted, and so it becomes the odd man out, not that it disunifies, but it becomes the thing we notice by virtue of different, because difference is in direction. It is tilted, it's slanted, it's not straight up and down. Another way to create emphasis is by contrasting of scale. You can create something larger, and it is the most important thing, and it's what you notice first, and everything else is diminutive. A lot of movie posters use hieratic scaling, which if you recall when we were talking about scale and proportion, hieratic scaling is where you scale something larger because it is the most important. And so this cover for one of the Harry Potter film series, Harry Potter is the largest face in the bunch. Notice also it's approximately symmetrically balanced. Notice how the warm colors advance and the cool colors recede. Notice it's a closed composition. Emphasis by contrast in texture. We can contrast rough-looking texture with smooth texture. We can contrast small texture with large texture, things like that. So in this design, we have an overall textural quality that actually seems to have a starting point right along this line in the middle of the design. And everything kind of points to it and emanates from it. And this calls our attention because the textural effect is doing something differently than the textural effect to the top or the bottom. Another way we can create emphasis is to contrast in terms of color. As we look at the dance studio motif, which was one of Degas' most, I think, favorite subject matters to work with, we notice that there's a lot of chromatic neutrals, the browns, the tans, and so forth. A little bit of pink here on this dancer. This becomes emphatic. We've got stuff going on, and this dancer is over here on the floor by herself wearing a bright color. She is the standout. This whole design space harmonizes, and everything within the frame of reference works together. Obviously it is diagonally stressed, it is a horizontal structure, it is an open composition, and we have a lot of spatial devices going on in here, so everything we've talked about is present in this. We have repetition of figure, we have repetition of directions. On the diagonal we have repetition of color, and then she is the thing we notice because she is wearing this bright red in this very neutral background. Another way we can create emphasis is by isolation, where we have groupings of things and then something is separated. And again, that uses the Gestalt principle of proximity. So again, the aesthetics are based on psychological study of how we order the information that we're looking at in our field of vision, how we make meaning happen, and how we address things visually. So here we have a group of people basically kind of on a picnic, various, we'll call them family members or whatever. And notice that there's one out in isolation, and this figure is not really joined with these. These, even though there's two groups, they kind of come together and they seem to have a relationship because they're, especially these two figures, they're not touching, but they're leaning toward each other, so there's a psychological connection here. This figure is isolated, and we'll notice this figure, but what do we notice more? We notice the animal, the cat. The amount of negative space around this this little guy here sets it apart. It's also darker, so it is emphasis by color, but it is all by itself, looking at everybody else. So when we go to create emphases and anomalies, we can use one or more of these means or these devices to create the emphasis. We're not only relegated to just one. So by virtue of color and by virtue of isolation, this little guy stands out from all of these guys. By virtue of isolation, this one stands out. Obviously, the one that has two hits, the isolation and the color is more obvious. So, in the final analysis, What do you see here? This is actually from a Quicksilver website, and they sell kind of extreme sports and surfing clothing. But what do you see here going on in terms of pattern, in terms of dominance and emphasis, in terms of a sense of texture, in terms of other design issues that we've talked about? So I'll let you think about that. It may come up as a discussion question.